Galaxy S7 Active shares a lot of similarities to the normal Galaxy S7, and we'll talk about what those similarities are, but it also has a lot of characteristics that make it different. So I suppose the easiest way to talk about this phone is to talk about what's different and what's still the same. The biggest difference is obviously the way this phone looks and the way it feels in the hand compared to the regular Galaxy S7. Instead of an all glass and metal design, the S7 Active is made of a rubberized body that's also quite thick and honestly a little bit bulky, but that's usually to be expected when you're dealing with a rugged phone. The corners have been reinforced and are much beefier compared to the rest of the phone, which makes sense since most impacts from drops tend to occur on the corners. The rugged exterior makes the phone military 810G shock resistant against drops, which in layman's terms means this phone can take a pretty big beating. It's not indestructible by any means because you can still break it if you try hard enough, but it's going to be able to withstand your average drop better than most other smartphones. It can take a lot more of them too, which is awesome for people who drop their phones a lot, or you just simply need a phone that isn't so fragile. The best way to describe the S7 Active is that it feels like an S7 inside of a case, and it even has a front lip to protect the screen just like you would get with most cases. The screen is the same 5.1-inch Quad HD AMOLED screen from the regular S7, so it's super vibrant, contrasty, and bright, but unlike the S7 Active's display is supposedly shatterproof up to 5 feet drops, at least according to Samsung. It's made of Gorilla Glass 4, which we know can break, so shatter resistant is probably the more appropriate term, and it has a plastic layer on top of the glass to make that happen. It's basically just a screen protector, and the biggest downside to this that I wasn't really a fan of is that it scratches super easily. Another difference that you'll find on the S7 Active is the physical hardware buttons. So instead of capacitive keys, you have real tactile buttons for back and recent apps, and they definitely took some getting used to, I'm not gonna lie, but they are very clicky and easy to press. The home button is the typical Samsung home button, but unlike last year's S6 Active, you're not losing out on the fingerprint sensor this time around, and it works just the same as it does on the S7, so no real surprises there. The majority of the buttons and ports like the power button, micro USB port, volume rockers, and the speaker are in the exact same places as the S7, with the exception of the headphone jack, which got moved to the top on the Active. You'll also notice an extra button sitting above the volume rockers that Samsung calls the Active key. It's completely user definable for up to 3 different actions, so you have your standard short press, a long press, and a double press that you can set to open up any application that you want, and you can even set it to work when the phone is locked, which makes it even more useful. The last big difference with the S7 Active, and probably the most important difference, is the battery. It's got a massive 4,000 mAh battery that's even larger than the S7 Edge's, and if you love the battery life on the S7 Edge, you'll love the battery life on the S7 Active even more. I use this phone pretty heavily with a ton of gaming and hours of YouTube, and I still had a hard time getting this phone to die within a day's worth of usage, which is pretty incredible and definitely not a bad problem to have. It's pretty safe to say that the S7 Active has awesome battery life, and is probably one of the longest lasting phones I've ever used, so I have no doubt that this phone could get a good 2 days on more casual use. As far as everything else goes, it's pretty much identical to the regular S7. It has micro SD card expansion for extra storage, and it's IP68 dust and water resistant, so you can dunk it or submerge it in water and it'll still work just fine. There's a Snapdragon 820 inside with 4GB of RAM, and unless you've been living under a rock, you should already know that the S7 is a really fast phone, and performance is no different on the Active. The camera is the same 12 megapixel sensor with f1.7 aperture and that lightning fast dual pixel autofocus, so there's no difference in picture quality here between the Active and the standard S7. The images are sharp, vibrant, contrasty, and the camera performs well in pretty much all lighting conditions. You can still double tap the home button to launch directly into the camera, and the camera software for the most part is pretty much the same. It has all the same features and camera modes from the S7 like selective focus and live broadcast, but there's an aqua mode made specifically for the S7 Active that lets you use the Active key to take photos and the volume rockers to record video when you're using the Active underwater. It's running on Android 6.0 Marshmallow with Samsung's TouchWiz, so there's no real differences here with the software either. The only problem with the software is that because the Active is an AT&T exclusive, it comes with a crap ton of bloatware from all of AT&T's own services to apps like Lookout Security, the Yellow Pages, and DirecTV. They aren't really trying to hide it either because on first boot you're greeted with a home screen full of bloat, and unfortunately none of it can be uninstalled. And that's really the biggest downside to the S7 Active. I think a lot of people would really love to get their hands on a more rugged version of the S7, but with it being locked down to AT&T, not everyone is going to be able to, and you would think by now Samsung would make this phone available on more carriers. Honestly, there isn't much to not like about it. It's not the prettiest looking phone, obviously, so it isn't going to be for everyone, but the Active wasn't meant to be a good looking phone. If you want a good looking phone, go for the regular S7 or even the S7 Edge, but if you want everything that the S7 offers with an exterior that can take a lot of punishment and a long lasting battery, then the S7 Active is a pretty good choice. Carrier exclusivity